allowing me the scope to share these thoughts with you. But this title fascinates me, Happiness in Global South, from Buddha to Rabindranath. And it also fascinates me that Rabindranath, while talking about Gautam Buddha, actually talked about Buddha as being the supreme man to whom I have always looked up to. And there's a very short memoir by Hemantobala Devi, Hemlata Thakur, who traveled with Rabindranath to Borobudur and Siam and witnessed Rabindranath sitting before a statue of Buddha, actually, day after day in the afternoon, and crying silently. Obviously, the copious references that Rabindranath made to Buddha and the way in which many of his ideas were theorized lead us to believe in two different things. One is the concept of happiness, or Anando, which forms such a very important corpus of Rabindranath's writings. And also this concept of the global South, especially the presence of Buddha, his ideas, the radiation of his ideas in his times, and of course, the radiation of ideas of cosmopolitanism, Vishwabodh, in Rabindranath's times as well. As Professor Das so eminently pointed out from Rabindranath's Pradesh Samaj, that, Rabindranath was both a man of his times, alert and responding to the challenges, as well as recognizing within Buddha a person who towered across time also. Now, if I take Rabindranath's path to happiness, as I was trying to do today, I was trying to locate the different factors which go into the making of this concept, and finding the synergies with the ideas of Gautam Buddha on the one hand, and on the other hand, in the modern practical expressions of happiness that the royal government of Bhutan has so deftly pointed out from 1971 onwards, which the UN only could accept in 2013. So it's been a long journey for Bhutan, and it has put into practice many of these ideas. So I'm trying to locate the synergy of these ideas. Now, the operative word that Rabindranath uses for happiness is Ananda. And Rabindranath unifies, in many ways, the idea of Ananda, or happiness, and Shattam, which is truth. And he borrows this idea, of course, from the ideas of Devendranath and the Upanishads, when in the Shantiniketan very charter, there is this idea about Ananda Rupam Amritam Jad Vibhati, or the global and the universal presence of happiness and eternity. Now, in my mind map, Rabindranath suggests that the first path to happiness is through the Bodh, or the Bodha. And he makes a distinction of the different kinds of selves. And this is where I think, very importantly, he borrows from the Buddhist idea of self. He talks about the Choto Ami and the Boro Ami, the smaller I, the smaller self, and the larger self, both of which are present within us. And he sort of merges this concept with also the practical concept of the bowels. And he reckonantly, the bowels are a sort of wandering sect of singers in Bengal. And they talk about the two birds within our own self. The bird, the Ochin Paki, which continuously fits in and out of ourselves, which we can feel, but which we can never capture. So what is the moment at which the choto ami or the smaller I can move towards the larger I. This is Rabindranath's idea of the consciousness. And he says that this process is, and he uses a very interesting phrase in the Shantiniketan lectures. This is one of the lectures that he gave at the Shantiniketan Mandir, or the space, the Brahmo space, where you have hymns and lectures and songs. He calls this process guhahito, or something that is hidden. Rabindranath says that the awakening, the process of this awakening, is not so easy. It is concealed, and one must undertake a process of deep introspection. Now, within this, Rabindranath also uses two important words. One is prem, of course, and this prem, he says, the greatest example is, of course, Buddha, and that prem is above jat or caste, dharma or religion, and he says that was, in essence, India's greatest identity, its ability to open its arms. And the prem through Karuna comes in Rabindranath's idea to the Mongol Kaj, or good action, an action that benefits the community. And here, Tagore, of course, talks about the concept of dhan, or the act of giving. And he recurrently talks about the idea of nisharto dhan, or giving without any strings attached. In fact, many of us will remember the Gitanjali poem, number 51, where Tagore talks about, where the poet talks about meeting the king of all kings, and he's a beggar, and he looks forward to the king filling up his bounty, and the king comes and says, "What can you give me?" So the concept of prem, karuna, leading to the Mongol Kaj, and it is here again that Rabindranath stresses that this concept of the Mongol Kaj is not in isolation, but in participation. And this is where I see very strong similarities between Tagore on the one hand, and of course being inspired by Buddha, in the sense that Buddha talked about the Sangha, and Rabindranath, of course, talks about the ashram, Vishwabharati as such, where there is the principle of the cooperation, or the cooperative principle, as it were. One of his very famous songs, of course, where he talks about agriculture, and this is one department which he started recognizing that the Mongol Kaj, or the true action, must not merely benefit people spiritually, but materially as well, uplifting the great difference between the Bhadralok, or the educated classes, and the so-called farmers, as it were. So, talking about this Mongol Kaj, he talks about, he writes a song where he talks about Amra chash kori anande. Once again, so the everyday mundane work, therefore, gets sublimated as a kind of effort towards upliftment, and therefore this becomes, where the community itself is involved, and it is involved in this great moment of uplifting, is a way towards sublimation, as it were. There are two other things which he talks about, and the other aspect, one of the other aspects, of course, is Rabindranath's idea of Prakriti, and he uses the shloka Madhu Bakaritayate, where he argues that let everything be honeyed, let the air be honeyed, let the cow be honeyed, let the rivers be eternally fulfilled. Now, for Rabindranath, Prakriti is not something that is merely to be slaked off. It is something where we must feel a deep sense of kinship with. And he talks about this hymn to the tree, Briksha Bandhana, where he talks about the tree as part of the family. And for this, Rabindranath started a lot of fairs and programs at Shantiniketan, of which the most lingering one probably has been that of the Briksharopon, where a young sapling was brought in ceremony and greeted as not only a member of the family, but also as something which was to be sanctified. So this bond between man and nature is something which Rabindranath once again sublimates. Therefore, and this concept of plantation, continuity, and the act of giving back to nature is one of the fundamental ideas of sustainable development that Tagore started practicing in Shantiniketan at the turn of the century. We will remember many of his plays where he brings these issues back into the focus. For example, a play like Muktadhara, where Rabindranath is sort of questioning man's submission to the machine, where man chants Namo Jantra, surrendering to the machine. And Tagore's Boiragi figure, of course, once again, very in great proximity with this mendicant Baul, is again protesting against this. And the very idea of damming up the rivers, whether that is sustainable for society, is something that Rabindranath is asking as early as 1922. But the salient dimension, which I think Tagore brings to society at large and to this idea of happiness at large, is the question of aesthetics and the role of the artist. It's very interesting where in one of the essays that he delivered at the Mahabodhi Society, Rabindranath talked about the paintings, the wall paintings on Buddha at Ajanta, and he talked about the caves where the Jatakas, the life of Buddha was represented. And he gives a very interesting comment. He suggests that these artists toiled away in the darkness and never signed their identities on the paintings. For them, it was a process of surrendering, giving to the Buddha their one and only source of effort. So thereby art for Rabindranath becomes the way in which this chotoami, or the smaller eye of the artist, can reach up and try and be proximate with this boroami, or the larger universal, concept of that moves within the universe. And it is here that I see this duality, this kind of a dialectical interplay between the self and the non-self and beyond. Rabindranath using two very interesting metaphors. One of the lamp, where he says that the poet, this is a very kind of a romantic in the sense of history of literature, a very kind romantic kind of a metaphor where the chotoami, or the smaller eye, becomes the lamp which lights up the greater lamp. And the second is the Mongol Ghat, or once again, the receptacle which is used to hold the holy water or the flowers for submission to the greater deity, if you will, or the greater power, if you will. But Rabindranath is suggesting that if the lamp becomes more important than the light, or the receptacle becomes more important than the offering, it is then that happiness is negated and lost. Talking about Buddha's teachings, Rabindranath talks about nirvana and liberation and suggests it's not a negation, and I'm quoting him, but a positive reality, not by abjuring work, but by practicing of self-giving through right action, not just rejection of anger, but in the cultivation of immeasurable love and goodwill. It is here that he comes to the idea of the Dharma, which for Rabindranath is the highest ideal of perfection. And he's bringing together a lot of ideas from a lot of religious thoughts. He says it is a movement from reality, wisdom towards infinity, from peace, goodness towards love, the Santam, Shivam to Advaitam, and from the Satyam, Jnanam to Ananta. Now, it is this route that Rabindranath recognizes towards happiness from the Eightfold Path, of course. The Eightfold Path, where you have the Silas, which are the morals, the Shilas, which is right speech, right action, right livelihood. You have the Pragya, the right view, the right resolve or intention. And you also have the process of Samadhi, or the right mindfulness that we have heard referred to earlier in the seminar today. So this is Rabindranath's way of approximating, or Rabindranath's way in which he charts this movement of the Choto army to merge into the larger concept of the larger self, express it in different ways. And he uses the word Vairagya also. And he says when the Choto army, or the smaller I, can leave his dress behind and merge into the larger self, it is at this point that happiness can come. And therefore, I'd like to refer to three of his songs. As Prof. Das has pointed out, it's very difficult to translate Rabindranath's songs, but I'll make an attempt. Rabindranath used the song for this song as his Ashram Sangeet, or the song of Vishwabharati, till 1911. From 1911, you have the Ashram Sangeet as we know it. But this was a Brahmo Sangeet, which was titled as Mora Sottero Pore Mon, Aji Koribo Samarpon. So we will surrender ourselves and our minds to truth. And therefore, the first stanza of the song talks about truth. The next stanza, and this is where you see the aesthetic comes in, and how it can express itself in this rhythm of the universe and participate and create a kind of an objective correlative of the anandam that it seeks to project. The second stanza of the song talks about Mora mongolo kaje pran, aji koribo shokole dan, joyo joyo mongolo moy. So in righteous action, in beneficial action, will we all participate. And then he talks about the final stanza, where he talks about Anando. And this is a song which I would, if I could have sung, I would have really sung today, but I can't, and I wouldn't want to spoil the effect of the song. So he writes, Mora Anando Majhe Mon. So we'll surrender our minds in joy. Aji Koribo Visarjon, Joyo Joyo Anandomoy. So what is truth, therefore, becomes what is joyous. And then he says, Shokolo Drishye, Shokolo Vishye, Anando Niketon, Joyo Joyo Anandomoy. And this joy of recognizing the kinship of human beings and participating in the Karuna for all is something that is global. And he says that there is no religion which can be merely restrictive to one particular group of people. The great religions will always recognize their kinship with one another. Rabindranath had a word for this. He called this Vishwabodh in Sadhana, Vishwabodh translated as world consciousness. And therefore, the last lines of that song lead, Anando Chitto Majhe, Anando Sarbo Kaje. So joy in every work, joy in every mind, Ananda Sarvakale. So not only in our times, but beyond that as well. Dukkha Vipada Jale, Ananda Sarvaloke. So joy in all the lokas, Mrittu Biraho Shoke. So amidst all the grief, Joyo Joyo Anandamoy. Therefore, just as Keats had suggested, what is beauty is truth. Rabindranath is suggesting what is truth is also joy. Now, there are two other small references to songs I would like to just mention, since I talked about how Rabindranath's aesthetics, sublimates his concepts into the philosophy into the rhythm of existence. The one of these songs is very famous. Ananda Loke Mongola Loke Birajo Shatya Sundaro. So in the realm of joy and good action, do you reside, O truth, which is beautiful. Mohima taba udbhashito moha gagana majhe. So your mahima, or your expression, is throughout this entire universe. And the last song I would like to refer to is, of course, the poet, the individual who participates. Jagote ananda mache amar nimantron. So that man, that the individual is not negated here. He's invited to this great feast of joy of the universe. Rabindranath's universe is a joyous universe. It is a universe where Ananda is possible. And this possibility of the Ananda and the modus operandi through which man can achieve it is something that Rabindranath borrows largely from the ideas of Buddha. And this is what is reflected in that, what Professor Das pointed out, and in the ideas of the gross national happiness index that Bhutan practices: psychological well-being, health, time use, education, which is so important for Tagore, cultural diversity and resilience, which Rabindranath, of course, is talking about, community vitality, something which Buddha talks about, Rabindranath emphasizes, good governance, ecological diversity and resilience. So these are some of, and of course, living standards. Rabindranath was not, oblivious to the fact that unless and until an entire sort of group of people could be elevated from their poverty into reasonably decent living standards, happiness would never arrive. So it is these synergies within the global South that I think this seminar has attempted to trace. And it is these synergies that I have tried to humbly locate. I thank the organizers once again for giving me